This is method 8, riveted metal, and it's a great way to enhance architectural features like fireplaces and ceilings. Awesome texture, you can use a ton of different metallic combinations, and it just really, you can get it looking like an authentic metal finish. The first thing we're going to need to do for this process is make our plaster, and it's going to consist of 1 part Proceed rough regular texture and 1 part joint compound or drywall topping. Most muds will work, and the reason we're adding the Proceed to the mud is to make it in a more of an acrylic based plaster, which means it's going to be stronger and hold up better, and we won't have to prime it when we get to the paint step. So the two of these together are going to make us a pretty thick consistency mud that we can get to really stand up and create a lot of texture. So what I'll do is just start working my surface, which of course is flat right now. And I like to just roll the material on. And this isn't a huge area, so I could roll out the whole thing, and then I'm going to come in and trowel the material over the top. But just to show you, if I was working a large area, I'd roll out a section. Then I'm going to take my trowel, and I'm going to trowel more material on. So I put this as kind of like just a scratch coat to try and like bite in more of this plaster. And you don't need to put it on super thick, but I mean, you want it a little bit thick so when we're building up this texture, there's something you can actually feel and see. And I'm going to try and just kind of work it somewhat consistently in depth so that it's, you know, like it came from the same sheet of metal. Okay, then I'm going to take my bristle brush and I'm going to go ahead and stipple it. Now when I stipple it, it's straight on, straight off. It's going to pull those peaks up and create my kind of hammered look. Right now it's like really sharp and prickly, and like what we need to do is make it look like it was a flat sheet of metal that got hammered. So it needs to be totally flat except for pitting, so nothing should be protruding out, which means we got to kind of go to town sanding this thing. It's totally fine on job sites. I'll use like an orbital. You want to just use something flat, you know, like a sanding block or the flattest thing you can find, and just sand it until it feels totally smooth to your hand except for the pitting, so nothing is sticking out like pricking your hand. You just want it, the smoother you get it, the better the look's going to be in the end. And I would also recommend, when I do this finish, I pull the tape and retape a lot. Okay, it avoids like jagged edges on the side, gives me a nice clean finish, and it avoids me having like a white reveal once we get color on this. So I pulled my tape too. Okay, so now it's sanded and I have the perimeter retaped. Now what we've built, what this represents, is the hammered copper sheeting. Okay, now hammered copper sheeting isn't just stuck on the wall, it's held up there with copper banding. So now I need to lay out my copper banding. There's no simple way to really explain that because it's always going to be different depending on like the layout and the design of what you're applying this to. Right now I'll pop up on screen a fireplace that I applied this to, and you can see kind of the way I laid out the banding on that. The approach just kind of fit the space and fit the size of the fireplace. But coming back to this, what you want to do on this is you definitely want to have a perimeter of banding all the time, okay? And that's what's going to hold down the outlying area of the copper. So I know I need to lay out an outline, and then I need to secure, depending on how big I want to represent my plates, my copper sheeting, center banding, okay, to represent how many different panels. So I'm going to do about like 1 inch banding. So I know that I need to measure out, and I could draw on this with pencil because we're going to paint it later. I need to draw a 1 inch line around the perimeter, and I need to tape that off. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to get a pencil and a ruler and take care of that. Okay, so instead of taking a measuring tape and pencil, you can also take just some 1-inch tape because I want a 1-inch band. And we're just doing the perimeter right now. So I'll just mark in a few pieces of this for reference. So I know that creates a 1-inch gap. All right, and then I can take my 1.5-inch tape. And just run that from one to the other. If I can get tall enough. This might be a little off. Then I can just take my 5-in-1 here on the end and square it off. So I'll just do that around the perimeter first. Okay, so now I got my perimeter taped off. So now I'm going to do my horizontal banding right now. And so what I'm going to do, just for this to make it a little more interesting than cutting it right down the middle, I'm just going to drop it a little bit. So like, just kind of play it by ear, see what looks appropriate. I'm going to do 14, so I'll make a little mark on this side of my tape. And 14, so I'll make a little mark right there. And then what I can do is I can either draw it in pencil, or I can take a piece of 1-inch and go from line to line. Lay that on. And surround it in my 1.5. All right, and that'll be my horizontal band. Okay, so now for my vertical banding, I'm gonna do 2, just so I always like to kind of make things like a little odd. Odd's always more interesting than even. Same process, you know, especially on something like this, you want, like if you're gonna have 3 panels, you want to do your measurement and divide it so you know you have 3 equal patterns. Okay, because you know, unlike a lot of the organic finishing we do, this is much represents more like a industrial like look when you know everything's going to be very symmetrical and like proper. So I've done that, and I'm going to mark these guys at, I'm going to give it a 14, 14. And when you do this, when you're dividing it up, be sure you're taking into account compensating for the width of your tape line or banding line you're going to have, because otherwise your math's going to end up lopsided. Okay, so I've done that, and I remember that the way I just measured this out, I need to drop my 1-inch tape line to the outside of both my marks. So I got my spacers up, 1.5. One and a half. Okay, so now go ahead and pull these out. And then I'll get ready to show you how to cut these out properly, and then we can get the plaster. Okay, so I get my 5-in-1, a little razor. First thing I need to do is get rid of all this stuff that's falling into my other bands, because I can't trowel plaster into there with it in the way. So, when I'm doing stuff like this, it needs to be very mathematical and systematic. I lay in all my lines. That's a process that's repetitive, and I'm not having to change gears. I'm just concentrating on doing that. Then I remove all in pieces like I'm doing right now. Just so I'm always concentrating on one task and I'm not getting thrown off, because it just leaves room for me to start troweling plaster and realizing I missed something or one of the employees did, and everybody thinks it's OCD, but it works so far. So now what I need to do is I need to get rid of these intersections, okay? So what I can do is I can either just kind of cut them in the middle and flip a piece up and then get that straight line back. Okay, so I can either do that, or I can just put my 5-in-1 up against a straight line and just use it as a guide to cut the piece out, and then I get my straight line that way. So I'm gonna go around, I got this, everywhere. Okay, I need these all to intersect nice and clean, so I'm gonna take care of that. And I'm just gonna take a putty knife, and this is gonna take 2 passes for me, so I'm gonna do this and let it dry and hit it again, because I really want, you know, some depth on these bands, and I want them to look kind of smooth and a little refined, but we're still gonna beat them up a little because it's supposed to be like a little aged. But I'll just start wherever and just start laying this stuff over. You know, the first coat's really just gonna fill in the texture we already created, and then the second coat's really gonna kind of smooth it out and beef it up a little bit. So I got my first coat on, I need to let that dry. It's on pretty thick, it's probably gonna take overnight. And then I'll come back and kind of backfill it in with one more final coat, and then we can kind of get a little closer to throwing our rivets in there and then paint. Same process, take my putty knife, and this one I'm kind of gonna start to smooth it out a little bit because the first coat went on a lot thicker just to kind of build it up. So I don't need it totally smooth because it's supposed to look somewhat old and beat up, but this will smooth it out a little bit. Dry, so now what I need to do is go ahead and pull my tape, and then we're going to sand it again. So I'm just going to pull the tape now. Okay, so I've pulled my tape, and now I got my banding inset. So now what I need to do is just give it a sand, because when I pulled the tape, you know, I've got all these rough edges along there, which is okay. I'm not going to clean them up so that they're like perfect, because this needs to again look like kind of corroded, old, beat up. So I'm just going to give it a sand and kind of clean it up a little bit on these bands. Okay, so I have my bands sanded, and as you can see, you know, they're not perfectly straight. They're cracked and kind of messed up, like they've corroded over time. So we just have one last step to enhance some of these plaster areas, and then we'll move on to color. Okay, for the last step in the plaster, you know, where these intersections are, it's just flat right now, and I need to make it look like, you know, I'm gonna make it look like there's some sort of plate over every intersection. So all I'm gonna do is take tape at every intersection and just tape it off in the shape of a square. So I'm gonna do that one to every intersection, okay? And come in. And basically I'm just making that like it's gonna end up being kind of a raised section. All right. So I'll just go and do that to every single one, and then we'll just need to let that dry, and we'll get on to some of the funner stuff. Okay, so once again, it's just a small square, and then you can see how, you know, I didn't do it super thick, but I definitely got a good coat on there, so it's gonna look nice and raised. Okay, so now I have my intersections sanded and they're ready to go. I'm done with the plaster. We're gonna move on to laying in our rivets, when we're gonna use upholstery tacks to do that. And I have 2 different upholstery tacks. I have a kind of square head one that's gonna go in all the intersecting areas where I've kind of created this raised area just for like kind of a design accent. And then for the majority of the band, I'm gonna use your basic upholstery tack. It's just like a round head. And just kind of place that in. I'm gonna evenly space those, so I need to go ahead and start measuring out right now. And just keep in mind, like if you're doing, especially like I've done a whole room of this before, and if you space them an inch apart, you're gonna use thousands and thousands. So just keep that in mind, like how many upholstery tacks you actually wanna have to sit here and hammer in individually. So first thing I'm gonna do is just measure out my board, and then I'll start hammering them in. Okay, so now you can see on my pencil marks, I've got like all the reference for my tacks laid in. The first thing I'm gonna do, like I said, I have these square head tacks, and I'm gonna lay them on my intersections. So I'll do those first, and then I'll come in and lay in all my just round tacks. Okay, so I got all my rivets in, ready to go. Now I'm gonna start painting it. I'm gonna use Modern Masters Statuary Bronze is the color. It's one of their metallics. And I just have a tray and a 3/8 inch roller. So I'm just gonna throw on 2 coats of this. All right, so I got a good solid coat on. I'm gonna do a second coat, get full coverage, make sure that I don't miss any areas back behind these nail heads. If you're really worried about it, what you can do, a lot of times with metallics, I'll base it in a black paint first, and that way if I miss anything, at least it's gonna show up black. So I'll let this dry, and then we're gonna come back and overstain it, and hopefully it'll look like metal. Okay, so my metallic paint is dry, and what I'm gonna do next is build an overstain, a glaze mix, to go over the top and really enhance all this texture. And for that, I'm gonna use Proceed Full Body Glazing Medium. I'm gonna take 8 ounces of that, and to that, I'm gonna add 4 teaspoons of dark brown aqua color and 4 teaspoons of black aqua color. Okay, so I have my glaze mixed up. I got a 3/8 inch weenie roller and a chip brush. And so what I'm gonna do is just go ahead and cover this whole thing 100% coverage. This might take a minute because you really want to work it in all that texture. Okay, so I have my board completely covered in the glaze, and now I'm just going to take Viva or shop towel and make a nice big flat pad, because I want to let all the glaze sit down in my indented texture and just buff off what's on top. So I'll just start buffing it back till I get the color I want.